Good morning and welcome to this webinar, Mastering Automation and Compliance with the Power of EDI. My name is Dennis Zachariasen and I'm your webinar host today. I'm also one of the co-founders of BizBrains, where I, as Chief Evangelist, talk a lot about automation and EDI to spread the word about our B2B integration platform called Link. One of the great features of Link is that it enables your line of business to master the power of EDI without having to involve IT every time a transaction fails or when you have to onboard a new partner. Our customer Flügger will tell you more about that later when Palle Andersen revealed the success story to EDI maturity, as they call it. Because the purpose of this webinar is to provide you with unique insights and knowledge on how to boost your efficiency in B2B integration while staying compliant. That's why we also invited experts from Deloitte to join us today. They will be shedding light on invoice compliance, and they will be presenting the findings from their report, The Future of Electronic Data Interchange. We highly encourage active participation in our webinars, so please use the Q&A, the panel in Zoom, to ask any questions you might have for our speakers. I'll share the questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session with all the speakers. One question that we always get is, will you share the presentations? And yes, you will receive an email with a link for both the recording of the webinar and the slides from the presentation afterwards. And now I would like to present our first speakers who are joining us live from Belgium. Fabian Deutschendorf and Philippe Veraneman from Deloitte. Welcome to both of you. And please introduce yourself.
Good to be here. So, thanks, Dennis. My name is Fabian Deutschendorf. I'm a member of the Intelligent Automation team within the Finance and Performance service line of Deloitte Belgium. And together with my colleague Philippe, who will introduce himself in a minute, we are leading the P2P offering. And I'm delighted to be here to talk to you a bit more about e-invoicing and automation.
Hello, everyone. Philippe Veraneman here. Indeed, like Fabian said, part of the Intelligent Automation team here in Deloitte Belgium. Welcome, everyone. Delighted to be here as well. And I'll be covering the part about EDI and the difference between EDI, e-invoicing, and so on. So stay tuned.
Thank you. And I'll switch so we can see your presentation like this.
Indeed. And I'm going to move a little bit into the center because the first part is definitely going to be covered by me. So welcome everyone to our webinar. As Dennis said, we are going to go a little bit deeper into how EDI can actually help us in terms of automating processes for us, specifically the purchase to pay process, but also with compliance. But before we deep dive into the topic of e-invoicing and e-reporting, I think it's just fair if we level a little bit the playing field. And for that, it's wise to agree on a couple of terms that we are going to use throughout the session. So we brought here 5 key terms that we are going to discuss, that you're going to hear within the next hour quite a lot. And we just want to agree on those so that we have common understanding, because we understand not everyone in the audience might have the same level of knowledge. Firstly, e-invoicing. So what are we actually referring to when we're talking about e-invoicing? The first thing that we have to really clearly state is we are not talking about an invoice that is coming in as a PDF via email. That's not an e-invoice. We're really talking about an invoice that has been issued and is received in an electronic format that can be automatically and electronically processed. So that's the very big difference. Then the term e-reporting is very much related to e-invoicing, but here we are not talking necessarily about e-invoices, but about tax data, so the electronic submission of tax-related information, such as, for example, VAT declarations and other reports through digital systems and platforms by tax authorities that can then also be automatically and electronically being processed. So those are the 2 key concepts that we are going to talk about within the next hour or within the next half an hour for sure, before we get to the customer case. Below you see 3 terms that we are going to use to explain and describe those 2 concepts. And the first one being the VAT gap. So VAT gap, the value-added tax gap, what are we referring to when we're talking about this? It's actually quite simple. We are really referring to the overall difference in the amount expected from VAT payers by tax authorities to the actual amount that has been collected. So there we are referring to the VAT gap. And then next to that, we are going to talk about domestic trading and intra-EU trading, where domestic trading, we're really referring to every kind of exchange of goods and services that takes place within the borders of one country, whereas intra-EU trading, and it's going to be important on one of the next slides as well, we are referring to the exchange of goods and services across borders of 2 member states of the European Union. So these are some key terms that you're going to hear in 1 hour for sure. The first question that we want to ask, or that we ask ourselves, why are we actually talking about e-invoicing and e-reporting, and why are we talking about this right now? And that is because we see that e-invoicing and e-reporting is really accelerating on a massive scale globally, but also within the European Union. Within the past decades, we saw, again, globally and in the European Union, that many countries had huge issues with the huge increasing VAT gap and VAT frauds. If we're looking at, for example, the European Union in 2018, there was a VAT gap, uncollected VAT cost of 140 billion euros, which obviously had a huge impact of the national economies and the European economy in general. And actually, there were multiple countries. This was not a single country phenomenon. Countries like Italy, before the Brexit, also the UK, but also Germany and France, they suffered in the past quite a lot from this increasing VAT gap. And the VAT gap, where we're talking about it, we have to be aware that we are mostly talking about non-paid VAT and VAT frauds. But we are not talking only about small companies or medium-sized companies. We are really talking also about large companies such as Facebook, for example, who has been pursued by Italy for almost €1 billion in sales tax outstanding. All right. So many countries then at this point realized that this is a huge issue, and countries in the European Union, such as Italy, it's a good example, they started looking into how can they actually fight the VAT gap. And they found that electronic transmission of invoices and also of tax information is actually a very transparent and good way to fight the VAT gap and to fight VAT fraud. So Italy started already, and we're going to come back to that in a minute, Italy started already in the past to implement e-invoicing mandatory through a specific government portal. But if we look a little bit at the development of countries that have e-invoicing implemented globally, or e-invoicing and e-reporting mandate in one form or another implemented globally, before 2019, we're almost only at 9%. Fast forward to today, we see that in the past years, there has been actually quite some development. So 34% of countries globally have e-invoicing mandates and e-reporting mandates implemented, with Italy being one example. But we've also seen that on a global scale, in South America, there was a huge push for e-invoicing as fighting the VAT gap there was also a very important topic. Now, looking into the future, from now until 2030, we estimate that at least 70% of all countries worldwide will have, in one form or another, e-invoicing or e-reporting mandates installed and implemented. And actually, this number is not an overstatement if we are looking at the timeline and the sheer amount of mandates and drafts that are being created on the global scale and with the European Union right now. And we brought here a bit of a timeline. The idea is not to go into the detail. So you can look a little bit closer into that. And the message here is that there's a vast majority of countries, so we're looking from 2023 into the next years, on countries that have already implemented e-invoicing mandates or that are drafting this. And just to give you some examples, to put this a little bit in perspective, if we are looking, for example, at our home market here in Belgium, we have already in place, for example, for government relations, so for invoices that are being sent, for example, to the Belgian authorities. And we are drafting currently a B2B legislation as well within Belgium. Again, it's a draft, and we see that here marked, where the idea is to implement in the first wave for larger customers with an annual turnover of more than 9 million euros, e-invoicing mandatory for the beginning of July 2024. So when we're looking at Belgium as an example, again, it's just a draft, so it has still to be verified by governments. However, if that goes through, and it shows also that the development can be rather quick when we're talking about e-invoicing, e-reporting mandates. It could mean that in less than a year, larger companies will have to have something in place to send and receive. As a second example, on top, you also see Italy. I mentioned Italy already. They are using their SDI government portal already to receive invoices of larger suppliers, but they're going into a second phase in 2024. So what they are going to do is they are also going to the revenue up to 25,000 euros per year, which is a clear sign that they want to also tackle now a medium-sized and smaller companies which e-invoicing and mandate e-invoicing follows. If we're looking a little bit at the Nordics, which might or will probably be quite important for many people in the audience, if we're looking, for example, at Denmark, they are going down a similar road than Belgium and Italy. E-invoicing for businesses to governments has already been implemented to an extent, but there was also a draft to implement mandatory e-invoicing in the first wave for 2024 within a new bookkeeping act. However, in Denmark, this bookkeeping act that has been delayed, so it's still in a draft version, and there's no new timeline being communicated. So there's no fixed date when this should be live. But again, here, the message is clear. This development can be rather rapid within the domestic e-invoicing sphere. And it means that within 1 year or 2 years, it's very likely that in one way or another, e-invoicing or e-reporting mandates also in a country like Denmark will get into. So I do hope that you could understand of most of what I just explained. And we gave a couple of the examples of the mandates that are being drafted that are already in place. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the example of Finland, where there are no concrete government mandates being put into place right now, but in the Finnish e-invoicing act years ago, the Finnish government actually said that suppliers can mandate their buyers to receive e-invoices. So it's more an indirect impact there on invoicing, which can obviously also be huge and can have a huge impact on businesses. And as initially said, you see, there are a lot of things here on the slide. So this is not a full overview, but it should give you the sense of urgency that there actually is on the mandates that are coming in the coming years. And why is that? That's also due to what you see on the very right of the slide, the EU draft. So within the VIDA proposal of the European Commission, VAT in the digital age, that's what VIDA stands for, the European Commission wants to mandate, and now we're talking about intra-EU invoicing, so as defined between different member states of the European Union. They want to mandate intra-EU e-invoicing as of the 1st of January 2013. This draft was initially planned to be in force by the 1st of January 2028, but due to the fact that there's a lot of negotiations still ongoing with the member states, it has been postponed to 2030. Right? So this is a little bit the theory of the mandates being put in place. However, what does it actually mean in practice? And in practice, we are talking more about the impact that the new mandates will have on businesses. And there, very concretely, we are talking about the impact that this will have on software architecture and the finance and tax-related architecture in businesses, right? And if we're looking at the slide on the left part, currently in most countries within the European Union, here Belgium and Germany as two examples where the post-audit world, right? Supplier and buyer, they can exchange the data, they can exchange invoices among each other as they want. Electronic invoicing for some larger companies is obviously already in place, and there's definitely for some participants in the audience as well. However, what we see at our clients and in the market is that sending out TEF invoices and then scanning those, etc., is still very, very present. Even the scanning of invoices that come in physically via mail. So that's where we are right now. Within the EU, we are first going to move in the first stage towards interoperability model. And that's something that's already applied in countries like Australia or New Zealand, where basically the two parties, the buyer and the seller, have a service provider or a broker plugged in, integrated with their ERP. And what happens there is that those service providers will interact with each other and interchange the electronic invoicing data. The formats, for example, there are multiple invoicing formats. Philip will talk about that at a later stage. But yeah, those service providers will be able to receive and send in different formats and interact. Then at a later stage, what's going to happen in the EU is that the government and the tax authorities will be integrated into that as well. So depending on what kind of specific mandates they are on a domestic level, this might differ. That's why you see here some different models. But on a European level, what we expect is that we most likely move towards the interoperability model that you see in the center. So there we basically have a similar model as on stage one, but the government is in the middle. That's something that the French government and the Polish are actually implementing now for the next year, where you have the government in between the service provider, and the service provider is integrated to the government portals, sending the invoice through the government portals, which receives also automatic feedback and real-time feedback from the government on if the invoice is okay, for example, before it's actually further transmitted to the service provider of the receiving party. And obviously then there's also an interaction there back, so the government exactly knows what the buyer has purchased and the VAT percentages on the invoice, etc. So there we're talking really about interoperability. And in terms of real-time reporting, I'm not going to go into too much detail for the clearance and the reporting model, but there we're talking about a similar setup where the government is integrated with the service provider and invoice and tax data is interchanged. But again, this depends on the domestic e-invoicing regulation network. So as said, in a nutshell, this is obviously a change that will impact many companies, and companies need to be proactive. And when we're talking about being proactive, it means that businesses will have to look into the implementation or the extension of e-invoicing technology to be e-invoicing ready. And when implementing or extending e-invoicing solutions, there are a couple of things that have to be considered, a couple of things that are important. And we've put here a couple of items that we think are very important. So this is not an extensive list, but let's call them our highlights. And the first part of it is definitely on the suppliers side. So on the side of dealing with the people that you're actually going to do business with. So when we're looking at supplier adoption as a first point, it can be very tricky as a buyer to say, okay, we are going to go now future-proof way forward and saying we are going to implement the e-invoicing technology. It can be tricky to convince the suppliers, the parties that you do business with, to only send e-invoices, right? And there we see, and we've seen in the past, that it's really key to have a very clear and open communication, to communicate your ambition and your objective very clearly, but also to offer help. So to go to your business partners and say, okay, we can do this together, we can tackle this together, and achieve better results and also compliance together in the future. Next to that, on the supplier side, supplier diversity is a huge topic. You will know that the more diverse the supplier base, the more difficult it can be to onboard new suppliers as well, especially when it comes to something like a new technology, because the diverse suppliers obviously might have specific, themselves might have specific e-invoicing systems or other systems in place that you're going to have to deal with. So there, we see that it's very important to focus on the technology that's integrated with those different networks. I'm coming back to that in the next point as well. But also focus on the technology that most likely is helping you with the biggest suppliers, right? So this is the supplier side. From the technical side, we're firstly looking obviously at system integration. And that's a key point of attention whenever you're implementing a new software or a new tool into your IT landscape. And there, the problem is the same as for other tools as well. This can be very complex due to multiple ERP systems, for example, that it has to integrate with, but also due to other systems and legacy software. And there, it's key really to focus on a technology that is open and can seamlessly integrate with multiple systems. And the second part of the technology considerations, we are looking also at data security, which is obviously a huge topic these days, and has been in the past couple of years. We see that when we are talking about invoicing and tax information, this is highly important information and needs to be secured in a specific way. So there it's really key to implement very robust measures through firewalls, through specific encryption, to implement robust security measures to secure your data and also to secure the data of the people that you do or the companies that you do business with. And then lastly, very important as well, we've seen the variety of different compliance paths that are coming within the different countries domestically or across the EU. And it is very important to fully understand those requirements. If you have a business that is active in multiple different countries, it is really key to understand what are the different requirements that I actually have in each of the countries. And once this understanding is there, it is also key to stay up to date. It's very important to follow up on e-invoicing requirements and on tax requirements also going forward, as these might change in different countries or international. Right? So, in a nutshell, you see there's a certain level of complexity of an e-invoicing implementation. But it's not all bad, so there's not all just complexity and challenges. There are also a lot of benefits with it. Obviously, we have the compliance part, and I'll end up with that as well, still as the key. But if you're looking, for example, at the data side, we are really talking about the benefit of massively improved data quality through the electronic transmission and automatic. They're also about the standardization that businesses really can, because we do have the need to conform with the e-invoicing standards, which then impacts also the master data. It's a challenge and a benefit at the same time. Then next to that, we are also talking about the automated invoice processing, so huge efficiency gains that business can profit from. If you compare e-invoicing, automated e-invoicing, with how some businesses are still keen in their AP data, so their invoices manually into the ERP system, we obviously have a huge time-saving aspect that is really to be considered here as a main benefit or major benefit as well. Next to that, the data quality and also the efficiency aspects, we are also talking about the data reconciliation. So basically, due to the integration and the way that this e-invoicing is approached and automated, there are automatic compliance checks and tax checks with real-time feedback that you can rely on, which will reduce the number of wrongly received invoices. I think this also in the overview of the architecture, going from the government back on these flows. And then lastly, on the more technological parts, we see that there will be much less time spent on managing different requirements because the European Union will most likely move towards a standard for e-invoicing. That's being discussed still, and that's not decided, but on a European level, there's most likely going to be an e-invoicing or one e-invoicing standard format, which obviously also limits the complexity for you as a business and for your own team. If we look at the financial aspect of it, which is obviously also strongly impacted by what we've just discussed before as a benefit, mainly the efficiency part and the automatic processing, we see that e-invoicing will have a huge impact and improve working capital for businesses. So what do we mean by that? We mean that the days sales outstanding and the days payable outstanding will be improved. For the ones of you in the audience that are not familiar with those terms, when we are talking about days sales outstanding, we are basically talking about nothing else than the time in between you are issuing an invoice to a customer and the time that is then spent until this actually pays, so until you receive your money. And we're referring to days payable outstanding, we're referring to the opposite, meaning it's the time in between you as a buyer receive an invoice and the time that you pay. And these two key metrics are actually very important when we're talking about working capital. And also as a result of the e-invoicing technologies that can be implemented, it means that you will receive your money faster, and you will have on the paying side the objective to, for example, and be more flexible and also realize payment discounts, for example, because in certain instances you are able to pay your invoices faster through invoicing technology, which will then give you more working capital to also invest for other things. And then last but not least, I mentioned a couple of times now, the benefit of being compliant, this is the business criticality. And this is actually, together with the efficiency gain, that you should always keep in mind, the biggest benefit that you're going to have of implementing invoicing technology, because there are going to be in the future large non-compliance penalties. And here, what we want to highlight in this webinar, but what we always highlight to all of our clients, is there's no alternative to this. These standards will come over the past next years, in some countries faster, on a European level, maybe only in the next 7 years. But believe us, the next 7 years will be full of developments, and there's no way around it. So you have to be ready for this change. And why do you have to be ready for this change? Because there are certain penalties, as I mentioned, that come up. The first one, obviously, being the fines that might be there from governments, or that will be there from governments on to non-compliance. I think that's the first thing that everyone thinks of. Just to give you an example, the French government and tax authorities, they already confirmed fines that are for non-compliant invoicing. So for non-compliant invoicing businesses of 15 euros per invoice with a cap of 15,000 euros per year. And for the e-reporting side, we are talking about 250 euro fines per transaction with a cap of 45,000 euros per year. So it's not unsubstantial. Next to the fines, there are obviously also some less direct, also direct but less financial penalties that we see. The first one, also being partially financial, is the loss of tax benefits. So it can be if a business fulfills the requirement for certain tax advantages, when they are non-compliant to a certain extent, these advantages can be taken away from the tax authorities, which obviously also have a financial impact. Next to that, very important for businesses that are doing a lot of business with government bodies, is that there might be penalties on business restrictions, so that governments will say non-compliant companies will not be able to participate in government contracts, to apply for government contracts and to do business with governments. And then lastly, and I believe that's also a very important part, is the reputational damage. One, imagine that only one business in the market in a specific sector is non-compliant, while at the same time all the others are compliant. First of all, it will have a huge reputational damage within the industry. People and businesses will be aware of that. And secondly, from a supplier's side, if a supplier is non-compliant, the buyer will basically only look for compliant parties in the market and make them their preferred supplier, which also lowers the contract that will be put into place among the parties. So again, we can not stress it enough. This is a change that will come, and there's no way around it than being ready for it, investigating in invoicing technology, and making your businesses ready. However, and that's why we're here as well, together with BizBrains, EDI as a technology can help you with that. And on that note, I'll hand over to my colleague Philippe, who will start to go deeper into the technical.
So thank you, Fabian. Indeed, I'm here to talk a bit more on the integration side of things, and more specifically about EDI. Now, EDI, I'm sure most of you have heard this term before, but what we found is that EDI and e-invoicing were being used a bit interchangeably, one from the other. And while this is not completely wrong, let's say, this is also not completely true. And let me explain why. So I'll start with the definition of EDI. EDI stands for Electronic Data Interchange, and it's a framework that was established in the 60s to standardize, that's the key word, standardize file exchange between different computer systems. Now, basically, if you look at it in a different way, you just take a document. EDI will provide a standard. It can be an invoice, that's EDI 810. It can be purchase order, EDI 820, and so on. And EDI will provide you, like, hey, in a purchase order, I need to get the purchase order number, I need to get the line items, and so on, in a very structured and standard way. Now, as to why this is different from e-invoicing, as Fabian explained a bit earlier, this is just electronically sent information from the invoice. So as long as it's electronic and it is machine readable, it is an e-invoice, but it doesn't need to follow the standards of EDI. So that's a bit the key difference. So e-invoice is part of EDI, but it's not an EDI unless it follows the standard. So if we look at the slide here, indeed, like for any standard, there are sometimes different standards, like for anything. There is a specific standard established by the United Nations called EDI FACT, and this is used mostly in Europe. And another example is X12, which is another standard mostly used in North America. So again, what we're doing here is we're taking a document such as an invoice. We are inputting the information into this EDI structure, this very standard structure, and then it's being packaged. Now, this package needs to be sent to the other system, and that's how it's exchanged. And this is, there are just a lot of agreed upon standards, such as AS2, FTPS or FTPS, PEPL-BIS, which I'll come back to in a minute, and that's the Pan-European Public Procurement Online now. So this is one that the EU is most favorable of. or web EDI or DAM. No? So again, you take the document, such as the invoice, you package it into this standard format, which is EDI, and then you send this over using one of these protocols, these file transfer protocols. Now that we have, let's say, a definition of EDI, what are the advantages of it, and why is a technology that's been established in the 60s still used today? And also, why do we believe it's still going to be used in the coming years? So first of all, it's a message I've come across already before, but the messages are sent in a very standard format. So if you use the standard format, it ensures consistency. All your purchase orders, all your invoices that you're receiving or sending will always have the same format. There are no surprises. You don't get two completely different ones, one after the other. This obviously helps keep your business processes very consistent as well. EDI technologies are, like I mentioned before, quite an old one. They've been established in the 60s, and they're tried and proved. Every big customer that has EDIs nowadays see this as a very reliable way to exchange information. There's very rarely any big errors linked to it. And this goes together with the third point here. Once an EDI connection is established, it works well. Now, I'll get back to the caveat of that. But once it's established, it works very well. Now, like Fabian mentioned before, there are some EU mandates coming close. And a lot of this will include the fact that, okay, you need to use e-invoicing. And one of the preferred ways of doing e-invoicing is indeed EDI. And this is where some standards, such as the PEPL-BIS I mentioned before, are most likely going to be the standard that the EU is going to propose. However, just to be clear on this, it's not a mandatory one either. So for organizations that are already using EDI and are using one of the other protocols, they will likely be able to keep using them. But for any new ones, they will probably be recommended to use PEPL-BIS. And then, and this is a very important one, large customers are obviously the ones that drive the most revenue, and they are already on EDI. So obviously they will prefer and they will fight for the fact that they need to stay on EDI. So if you are onboarding a new large customer, they will say, hey, EDI or nothing. So this is something obviously to consider because of all the advantages I mentioned before, and it's already established. It works well, so why would they switch? So now we need to be a bit nuanced here as well and talk about the downsides of EDI. Maybe one of the downside, an important one, is real-time data. So EDI is not a synchronous way of information exchange. It's asynchronous. So it's by batches. Now you can have many batches, per day to make it, real-time like, but it is not real-time. It's still asynchronous. You are putting your documents, like I said, in this package, and then you're sending that package over, and then your customer receives it. It's not real-time, synchronously sent. The next one, it's flexibility. Now, this is in a way by design. So because EDI is very standard, it is also not very flexible. So if you have sort of a funky way to do purchase orders where you want to add a lot of new fields, EDI is not going to be very helpful there because the fields for the purchase orders are already quite established. So it has limited flexibility, but again, this is of course by design. This is the way we EDI should stay moving forward. And then third one is onboarding. So for anyone that is now starting a bit this journey, onboarding EDI is just like any new technology, we would say, a long and lengthy process. This is not something that you can do overnight. You need to look at it with a lot of different considerations. So, okay, EDI has obviously a lot of advantages. It has some disadvantages. So what do? You can actually combine different technologies. There's another technology that I'm sure, again, a lot of you have heard, which is APIs. And APIs can provide a lot of the benefits that the shortcomings of EDIs offer. So as an example, well, for those of you who maybe don't know API, maybe the definition, it's an application programming interface. Now, again, in a nutshell, what does that mean? it's a way to exchange data between systems. Again, there's a agreed upon structure beforehand, and the data is being exchanged. Now, the difference between API and EDI here already, for those of you who are really listening hard, EDI exchanges documents, while API exchanges data. While this is not that important in the grand scheme of things, this is important in the way that the information is being shared or something. So now we know EDI, we know its downfalls. Now, how can API provide, cover those EDI shortcomings? So APIs are usually quite easier to onboard. It's easier to set this up. It's usually established that the customer handles the errors. It's not something that, okay, if the information was not sent properly, you need to go and check why. It's up to the customers to understand why the message wasn't sent over. And it's real time. So this is one of the big key differences. It's synchronous usually, and you have real time information, which helps a lot with process intelligence, data analysis, and so on. And the digital commerce grows by onboarding smaller partners. So mentioned before, a lot of these big large customers are using EDI nowadays, but a lot of the medium or smaller ones are not, and they prefer more APIs. And this is a direction that a lot of companies and a lot of vendors are going for, API and API only. So this is something to consider. So if we look at the graph, what does this mean? That you will be able to cover potentially a lot more customers if you have APIs, but in terms of pure value, you will cover the ones that have the most value if you use EDI. So I'm sure you see what this is going. What we're proposing is a hybrid way of working. Now, the benefit of EDI for your big B2B customers, and you augment it by using APIs for maybe the medium to smaller ones that do not want to go on EDI. So if we look here, EDI remains indeed the go-to solution. So this is from an insight, the report produced by Deloitte. EDI remains go-to solution. In regions with lower B2B digital maturity, EDI remains a preferred solution, producing backend FTEs. This is still the case, and this is still true. Now, on the other hand, indeed, APIs are picking up pace. I'm sure most of you know API by now. The API usage is increasing, but on the other hand, the lack of standard messages in terms of the formats usually lead to a lot of higher complexity. Like mentioned before, APIs are used a lot, but they are dependent on the different vendors, different applications that are used. So SAP has their own types of APIs, Salesforce, and so on. So there are no established, let's say, worldwide standards. It's really up to each tool to have their own APIs and how to use them. But then on the bottom left, this is an important message, and I would say this is far beyond even this conversation today. Data quality is key. Of course, it doesn't matter how you're sending, how you're structuring your data, as long as your data is not proper, is not clean, let's say, you're going to have a bad time exchanging the information regardless of how you're doing it. And then, of course, EDI onboarding costly and lengthy. So again, if you are maybe a small company and you're dealing with small customers, the EDI story might not make a lot of sense. This is, however, if you are dealing with larger customers, they will push this eventually upon you, and they say, "Hey, we use EDI, so figure it out and see how you can work with us. This is how it should be." And onboarding, by experience, typically takes 2 to 4 months to get there. Okay, so thank you for listening. I'll hand back over to Dennis, and again, if there are questions, we'll see in the end.
Thank you very much, Philippe. And now it's time. Just stick around, guys. We will take the questions at the end. But for now is the time to invite our guest in the studio, Palle Andersen from Flügger. Let's switch sides so you can operate this PowerPoint. Welcome.
Thank
Just
you.
unmute.
Yes, that's right. Now I'm unmuted and hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm going to talk about our journey within EDI, and we are calling that at Flügger EDI maturity. My name is Pelle Andersen, and I have been in Flügger for 15 years, and I'm an ERP application manager, but also covering the EDI processes. I would like to start with why we are using EDI, and that is to cover our business model. We are a company that is producing most of our products ourselves and selling them through different sales channels. We have own stores, we have franchise, we have e-commerce, both B2B and B2C. And unfortunately, I also are bringing our revenue and EBIT, and we are not satisfied with that. But EDI is going to help us with lowering some of our costs. So hopefully next year you will see a better EBIT. As an example is that for only 3 vendors, I will be able to save 500,000 Danish kroner just by implementing a full EDI flow for our vendors. And we have 1,000 vendors, so there is a lot of potential there. To start with, why we are implementing EDI, I'm calling it VANS here. It has many names, but the objectives were to professionalize our processes around EDI, and to, of course, also have some of the savings that I was talking about. And that's a saving both for orders and for procurement and many of the EDI processes that we have in Flügger. And to do that, we need stable solution providers, and we have chosen BizBrains as our only EDI provider. We were coming from having 7 vendors and now only have 1, and that is, of course, a benefit also in the long run. We have an ERP system within Dynamics AX that is also part of our EDI journey. And then we have our invoice workflow system, and we are using one from Rillion, and we are using several different products around EDI. But all in all, we are very satisfied with where we are with our EDI journey. We have chosen that EDI should cover 7 document types at Flügger, 4 for customers and 3 for suppliers. And that is to support a full EDI flow. We could, of course, also include other documents, but that could be done if business needs them. We have the setup for it, and it is quite easy for us to add new document types and also to add new formats. And that's, of course, due to the link and the mapping in there. I talked about vendor discounts early on, but efficiency is also a key here. It is very important that our invoices are being invoiced right on time, that they won't be hooked up in an email box or whatever that we have seen back in the old days that could happen. Then I heard also Deloitte talking about data optimization and the quality of data, and that is key. I fully agree. Professional partnership, I just rounded that. But all in all, to have the right EDI includes all organization. And that is something that I'm going to talk about now. So how to achieve success? The first thing to do is to get an overview together with the organization. The organization knows best in business perspectives, and perhaps IT knows best in the technical part. But it is important that we sit around the same table and discuss what processes are we actually trying to solve here and how to do it. So the document that you are seeing now is actually an interactive document where all documentation is included for the purchase process that we have at Flügger. You can see some orange boxes saying monitor. It is very important to look into stability of EDI because the stability is key to a success. So if something goes wrong, it could be wrong mapping, wrong format from the vendor, or the data is born many places, and if something goes wrong, it is important that it is not going to the Eiffel Tower of IT, but to go to the person actually having the process in the organization. And for that, we are using super users to do that. So the prerequisites for having success is actually to first engage top management to clarify what are we aiming for having EDI. Is it costs? Is it better quality for our customers and vendors? What are we aiming for and how to surveil that? And then to create a super user organization surrounding that, because it shouldn't be IT managing all the processes around EDI. It is actually the customer support, the finance, the procurement that are doing the day-to-day work in there, including onboarding new vendors or new customers. I saw on the Deloitte slide that it is quite difficult to onboard new EDI partners, but I do not fully agree, because we have tried to focus on the onboarding process and put that to the super user organization, and they are actually onboarding using the link portal for that. Then, of course, I have the quality, like it has been mentioned many times today, I saw. And then the surveillance. And the surveillance is key to everything. At Flügger, it is very important that all IT is proactively surveilled. So I'm measured in that I'm not a reactive guy, but a proactive guy. So to do that, every process is being monitored. It could be the ordering process, it could be the invoice process, it could be the payment process. So if something gets stuck, it could be high water, low water measurement or others, then it will go directly to the person in charge. It could be, of course, IT part, or mainly it goes to the organization for them to decide, there is something wrong with the mapping, the number they got from the vendor was wrong, to correct that. So right now they are correcting it perhaps the same day without involving IT, and that's actually the key success of our journey. Then, of course, to monitor the KPIs, because I talked about top management before, and actually we are doing EDI to gain something. We have something we call a customer journey at Flügger, and we have many professional customers, painters, and so on, where it's very important that they see Flügger as a good and stable provider, both for the goods that we are selling, but also the EDI part and invoicing and everything around payment. And then there are, of course, the vendors, where we can gain some of the benefits I talked about early on. So the KPI, what we are doing is to measuring a baseline and reporting that through Power BI to the top management, and then they could surveil it and put initiatives into the EDI, and mainly that would be made by the super users, because the road has already been built, and we are not controlling what cars should ride on that. But the key thing is cooperation. I call it here teamwork is key, and that's where we have succeeded. It is building up a super user organization that is actually taking control, and IT is just supporting the process. We are not running it. To do all this, I have a team of 5 persons within ERP, but 2 of them are not mainly, but also focusing on the EDI part, and that is Yanni from my team taking care of the commercial part, and then there are Dan taking care of procurement and finance. And it wouldn't have been such a success if they haven't been there together with the super user organization, and also a very good cooperation with the BizBrains. And at Flügger, and then, of course, I'm also mentioning top management and the super user organization, because it is a full team that should work here. And at Flügger, we have 3 words that we should live up to, and that is team, time, and trust. And I can say that EDI maturity is covering all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Palle. I have a question, because as we heard from Philippe, API is playing a role, but you were talking mainly about what we could call like the old school EDI with the exchanging of files.
Yeah.
What is your thoughts about exchanging these documents over API?
We have at Flügger, we have a digitalization group looking very much into it is everything that is electronical. It is our websites, our customer portals, and so on. So we are also using APIs. We are having hook points into our ERP system. We have that's the Optigrator part that was mentioned on one of the slides. And then we have Delbumi, also within some of the web services. So I think it is important to do whatever is right on a specific task. So figure out the task, and then later on figure out how to solve it.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's also why when we do our product link, we really do our best to support both, so you can manage it all in one place. And I know you're doing that as well. I have a question for Deloitte, if you are still with us. Sorry about the picture again, but hopefully you can hear us.
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay,
it's
great.
A little bit, but we can hear.
So I just wanted to ask you, and that's also about API. Do you see any standardization initiatives around API coming up? Because I don't, and I'm curious to hear if you do.
Yeah, I don't think we've come across it ourselves in terms of standardization, because I don't think APIs want to be too standardized. Like mentioned before, it's really up to the applications. Also, the tools, the vendors, such as SAP, they have their own APIs. And of course, they will say like, hey, we have our own standards. So if you want to, use us, you should use our APIs, right? I think it's quite difficult to establish a wider standardization for every tool to use in that space, which is again where EDI plays a big role. Also, I completely agree with the comments that you should use the right tools for the problems. If you do want just a way of exchanging documents or consistent, then EDI is probably the way to go. But then you need to, of course, adapt to your customers. You need to adapt to the applications that you have. So it's not a very easy, kind of silver bullets where you just say like, hey, you should always use one or always use the other. It always depends on the context, of course. Huh? But indeed, that standardization for APIs, I don't think we've seen it on our side now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, but that's pretty much how I experience it as well, and I can supplement with an experience that for some customers we actually see that they not only mix EDI and API in the way where they use EDI for some partners and API for other partners. We actually also see that we use that they use both EDI and API for the same partner if they have a lot of interactions, and maybe some of them are like the basic ones with the order invoice and so on, then maybe use EDI because there are standards and it's a well-known way of cooperating. But then you might have with the same partner some business processes that are better supported with APIs. And I can ask Palle, is that something you see that you see a mix with the same partner?
Not at the moment. Flügger is cooperating with old school guys. Actually, in the paint industry, they are not. It is smaller businesses. And of course also larger businesses, but they are mainly doing it together with other advanced vendors. It is seldom that we are talking directly to an IT department. We are talking through another Vans provider through BizBrains, but still, we can solve everything through a link, but today it's mainly the old school part.
I have a question from the audience. I'll just look over here and read it up. Can API be used for the exchange of product data or price data? Yeah, and I can give my perspective on that. Yes, it can. But this is actually typically pretty large amounts of data that are exchanged, and maybe API is not the best. Also, it's not typically not a process that needs to be real time. Typically not, at least if it's the whole set of product data. So I would say go with EDI, or maybe go with. I've also seen setting up a specific path, for instance, exchanging XML files or even Excel files. It tends to be a little more customized, this process. At least if you have product data that is not very suited for the standard pre-CAD data type from Edifact or X12. Do you have anything?
Yeah, at Flügger we are mainly using a PIM solution for that to cover that, and of course we have many parties. Of course, we have the vendors and the customers, but if we are making offers to for example architects or larger companies that should build larger projects, then they are asking for a lot of EDI stuff, like they should be able to prove many data about our products and so on. So it is run through a PIM system.
Okay, thank you. And with that, it's time to wrap up, because time is up, and you probably have other meetings coming up in a short while. And I'll just say thank you to Fabian and Philippe from Deloitte, and to Palle from Flügger, and to all of you watching. And as I said in the beginning, you will receive an email with the recording and also the slides. And thank you for now, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.